Now let's go ahead and talk about some of our biggest sells in Dynasty. Michael, go ahead and start us off here. Who is one of your biggest Dynasty sells?
Yeah, when it comes to sells, I mean, everybody likes to label the 28-year-old running back or the wide receiver whose situation is starting to fall off. And on our podcast, Mung and I will talk a lot about selling high, and trying to move that. And my guy here is Travis Etienne. If you look at Travis Etienne with just a 7% target share from a guy who's 210 pounds, this is someone who finished RB 17, but closer to, he was out touched by James Robinson in the early part of the season. RB 33 overall for the final 8 games. And then what happens? They draft Tank Bigsby on top of that in the third round at 88 overall. Bigsby is a decisive runner who's just great after contact. I think he really eats into some of that red zone work and has a nose for the end zone. On top of that, they add Calvin Ridley. So now you have another pass catching option where you have Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, all who excel in the short to intermediate game. So I think some of that appeal is lost for Travis Etienne. And it's not that I don't like the player. He's just going in the same area in startup drafts as Drake London, as Josh Jacobs, Cooper Kupp. And what I'm trying to do in Dynasty right now is with the running back position, as volatile as it is outside that top 5, where those are elite young running backs, I'm trying to make insulated trades. We do those where it's giving up Travis Etienne and getting Aaron Jones in a mid-24 first, or trying to make moves like that where you stay relevant. And then you get that first-round pick next year who, the 2024 class looks fantastic. So you don't lose the production and you get off a guy that you're not quite buying in on.
Yeah, and I got to say, I'm proud of you guys, because when I talk about dynasty sells, everybody just wants to come on the show and say, sell Matthew Stafford and sell DeAndre Hopkins and sell these guys that are getting up there in age. I'm taking a peek at the show sheet right now, and you guys didn't hold back. We got some spicy ones here, so strap in because we're going to have some fun talking about this. Now, Travis Etienne is a guy I was beating the drum for last year in 2022 redraft seasons, and I got to be honest, he surpassed my expectations, but you cannot look at what they did, investing a pretty high pick for a running back in Tank Bigsby, and then also knowing that Doug Peterson just likes to deploy a committee approach. I mean, we saw this in Philadelphia when everybody wanted to free Miles Sanders. He was an efficiency beast, and we just, couldn't see it on a big workload. So that's the fear right now, is Travis Etienne is very good, but so is so is Tank Bigsby, and we don't know exactly how it's going to get split up. We haven't seen Travis Etienne be able to pull a significant target share either, which means that he could end up with some low value touches, splitting work with somebody else. So I think the name value and what we saw in some of his spike games last year are really inflating his value. Michael, I actually traded for Travis Etienne right before the NFL draft. And that stung. It stung big time.
Yeah.
I traded. I had the 101, and I traded the 101, which was obviously Bijan Robinson. I got Drake London, Travis Etienne, and a second, which looked great. But then the way that Etienne's value cratered after the draft, it's not nearly as fun to look back at now. Mung, if you've got another sell that you want to talk about, go right ahead.
We talk about selling running backs in the offseason, right? And in general, this is why we talk about the risk of running backs getting replaced in the draft. Dameon Pierce avoided that shot, right? But sadly, Kenneth Walker got hit by some flack here. Etienne, who we just talked about. Luckily, one guy who did not is Jonathan Taylor. And it might sound crazy, but here's why he's a sell for me right now. Love the talent. He was obviously hurt last year, only played 11 games, so not putting that against him. But even when he was on the field, the underlying metrics weren't the best. He only had 4 RB1 weeks last season, and he scored a touchdown all those games. So even though he was elusive, forced a lot of missed tackles, was still creating those yards after contact, he was really touchdown reliant in his fantasy production last season, and really even in the season before when he had that marvelous league-winning year. And it's also worth noting that Jonathan Taylor saw a career-high 11% team target share in 2022, up from 10 and 8% in his first 2 seasons in the NFL. And the big problem here is Anthony Richardson. Great pick for the Colts. Not so great for Taylor's fantasy value, in my opinion. If Taylor was productive in large part due to touchdowns and receiving production, the quarterback change in Indianapolis is a downgrade for Taylor in both of those areas, because we're expecting the Colts offense to be better overall with Shane Steichen. But at the same time, we saw that he did not hesitate to use Jalen Hurts at all last year near the goal line. Hurts saw the third most rushing attempts inside the 10-yard line last year, behind only Jamal Williams and Joe Mixon. And we've seen time and again that when a team adds a mobile quarterback like Richardson, the running backs just don't get as many targets out of the backfield or on checkdowns because those quarterbacks can just take off themselves for 50, 60 yards. And if we're projecting Taylor to see a decline in target share back down to the 8% or so he saw as a rookie, then he would just need incredible touchdown efficiency to be more than a back-end RB1 in fantasy, much like Nick Chubb. And I'm not sure Taylor's going to see enough goal line work to get there. He's still going to get touchdowns, but Richardson is going to vulture a few. So Taylor, obviously still a top dynasty running back, just 24 years old, has the talent. But if you're contending right now and you can sell Taylor for Eckler plus, McCaffrey plus, even Chubb plus, you might even be able to get Breece Hall plus for Taylor right now, depending on the league. So again, not a sell just to sell, but if you're still getting elite value for Jonathan Taylor, I would definitely explore that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people look at last year where Miles Sanders kind of backed into an RB1 finish in a Shane Steichen offense, and they say, well, if Miles Sanders can do it, then, why can't Jonathan Taylor as well? But the difference is we're probably not going to see the Colts this year in Anthony Richardson's rookie season be top 5 in plays. I mean, last year the Eagles, despite having a good defense, when they were on the field, they were running plays quickly and they got a lot of snaps off. We're probably not going to see that in an Anthony Richardson-led offense. So it's going to be a slow-paced run-first team, which sounds good for Jonathan Taylor until you realize that there's going to be almost no pass catching upside. And when they get inside the 5, we're going to be looking at the tush push. I mean, we saw it work so well with Jalen Hurts. Why don't they just go right back to doing it again with Anthony Richardson? So again, I said we're getting spicy here with some of these running back sells, and selling a stud 24-year-old running back is definitely one of them. But I completely agree with you. Michael, what are your thoughts? Are you trying to sell Jonathan Taylor?
I think it's a matter of what we talk about a lot on our podcast is trying to mitigate risk, and the riskiest position is the running back. So we try to buy the production and move there. But I mean, right now you're able to get, if you can move up a little bit to get Breece Hall, who I feel like is going to be phenomenal this year, or you get in a position where we really advocate, getting those quarterbacks and those wide receivers to really, shore up your offense. I think you can possibly get, Olave plus, Amon-Ra St. Brown plus, maybe even Waddle plus, and that gives your team more longevity as you fill in with the running backs a little bit later. So I'm not actively trying to shop Jonathan Taylor, but the value is there. And, if we have another season like last year, he's going to dip considerably.
Yeah. And I'll just stay right on theme. I mean, we didn't plan this, but it's just kind of the way we're going. Michael, you talk about selling Travis Etienne. Mung, you talk about selling Jonathan Taylor. And now I'm going to tell everybody to sell Kenneth Walker. I mean, we're talking about 3 guys on the right side of the age curve that put up good seasons over the last year or two. But for me, looking at Kenneth Walker, I'm scared. I mean, but he's got the draft capital. He's got the size to be a 3-down NFL back. He's 22 years old. I can understand why you'd want to hold him, but Zach Charbonnet is taller, heavier, younger, similar draft capital. To me, this duo screams frustrating committee. And I know you don't want to look at like short-term approach, but also we kind of have a long-term sample of Pete Carroll liking to have these committees and deploying his running backs in that fashion. So like I said, Charbonnet has the size advantage there, and he pulled 3 times the target share in college. So there's a chance that Kenneth Walker ends up as that early down between the 20s guy, and the passing down work and the goal line work both goes to Zach Charbonnet. Now, that's obviously worst case scenario, but it's also a very realistic possibility. And right now, you're still paying top 10 price tag for Kenneth Walker, despite the addition of Charbonnet this offseason. So really, I think you could make an argument for either of these guys to be the top dog in the offense. It feels so much like the Chris Carson and Rashad Penny conversation that went on year after year after year after year, and now it's behind us in the rear view. And I still don't think we really have a question who the better, or an answer to that question, who the better running back was. I mean, it was just frustrating. You wanted to pull your hair out watching it every single week. And the way that I'm looking at it is you just want to take the cheaper of the two because we don't know who the guy's going to be. And right now there is a premium price tag on Walker because we saw him have a good rookie season. But looking at Keep Trade Cut right now, Walker is the RB8, Charbonnet is the RB19. Give me Charbonnet, who actually profiles to be a better running back and can be had for significantly cheaper. So if I've got Walker and I could somehow convince somebody to give me Charbonnet plus, I'm taking that and running to the bank with it. What do you guys think about trying to move off of Walker for Charbonnet plus?
Yeah, I think we're going to be in a bit of a timeshare, and I think what I've been trying to do with my Walker shares, I mean, Bulletproof has him as RB7. You said Keep Trade Cut has him as RB8. If you look at the other guys there, I mean, you got guys like Najee Harris and Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, Nick Chubb, Tony Pollard as those next couple guys behind them. Those guys are going to be absolute, like we talk about path to relevancy and the guys getting the touches. Those are the guys that you want, and I think I'm ultimately trying to move around from Walker to get to that way. But I think, like we said before, as far as the tight ends trying to extrapolate the value, we're looking at how can you get the most on top. And I think Charbonnet plus is a good option to go for there.
Michael, let's hear your next sell.
All right, my next sell. I know you guys are going to think I hate the Jaguars, but I actually really like the Jaguars. But we talk a lot about, process over results. And right now, if you have Calvin Ridley, I am actively selling Calvin Ridley unless I am all in. Calvin Ridley in 2020, fantastic, right? 90 receptions, 1,374 yards, and 9 touchdowns. But he hasn't played since October 2021. That value cliff for wide receivers is at age 29. Yes, they could still be productive up until 32. That doesn't start to drop off. But the value in Dynasty at 29 really starts to drop off, and he will turn 29 this December. So I like the player, but we can't just pretend like Christian Kirk's wide receiver 1 season didn't matter. He's someone that absolutely dominated touches. And again, I like Calvin Ridley as a talent, but right now you look at that round 7 where he's going. You can get Chris Godwin, who has been more productive and has been on the field 2 straight years. You can get Hollywood Brown considerably cheaper. I mean, these are the values that I'm trying to get where I don't not like, I'm not against Calvin Ridley. And I every time I say it on the podcast, every time I tweet about Calvin Ridley, people are like, he's everyone's darling, right? They want him to bounce back. And it's just been a long time since he's been on the field. And I feel like the process for me is I'm selling a guy that's going to be 29 years old and trying to buy a guy that's going to be 24 with similar type production.
Yeah, I mean, this stat is so misleading and it doesn't tell the whole story, but I just was thinking about it the other day. I'm like, he's 29 years old and he has 1 season with 1,000 yards under his belt. I mean, this guy was drafted old, had a couple years to kind of ramp up behind Julio Jones before he ever gave us a dominant season. Then he got hurt. Then he was suspended. I mean, there's so much risk baked into this guy. And when you talk about him in the same tier as Chris Godwin and Marquise Brown, I just can't get behind it at all. I mean, look at it, 2023 alone. In redraft, I prefer those guys over Calvin Ridley. It just seems like the entire community has gotten over their skis. He was a fun player. It seemed like fantasy Twitter especially was all in on the Calvin Ridley breakout a few years ago, and then it hit, and now they're trying to recapture that magic in a bottle 2 years later. I'm with you, man. I don't want anything to do with a 29-year-old who hasn't played in 2 years, acclimating to a new offense. It might take him half a season just to ramp up, and then you get a handful of good games from him, and then all of a sudden he's a 30-year-old wide receiver who's a depreciating asset that you're not going to be able to get anything for. So completely with you. If you can capitalize on the hype right now, 100% doing that.
Yeah, and we're always talking.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Like last year, we were advocating buying him. We were buying him for late seconds. Now he's worth, at least a 24 first. You get that on top. That's how you win. Those little wins in there, and you buy low, sell high. And I think that's where we're at right now for a guy that's going to turn 29.
Yeah, that's the name of the game. And I mean, if you can flip him for a first-round pick, I didn't even know he was going for that high. But if you can get a first-round pick for Calvin Ridley right now, I'm not thinking twice about doing that. Mung, bring us home. Let's talk about another running back that is on the right side of the age curve that you're selling. Let's hear it.
Yeah, real quick, I will add one note on Ridley. I agree in principle. The only thing I'll say is I do think his value has room to grow a little bit more in the coming months. We saw the hype train just already start taking off from the station when we saw a video of him just doing some cone work in OTAs, right? So just imagine if you wait to sell, right, in training camp, if he makes a couple highlight reel grabs. And then when you look at the schedule too, maybe this is galaxy braining too much, but the Jaguars start with the Colts, the Chiefs, and the Texans, and those could be some high-scoring games against bad defenses. So he could have a massive start to the season. So I think it's fine if you want to hold Ridley for now, because I do think that he might get even more hype over the next couple months. But going to my final sell, we're back on the running backs. I guess you guys can sense a theme here. And we talked about Kenneth Walker. We talked about Travis Etienne. and another confusing backfield that people seem convinced on. I talked about a concerning lack of receiving usage potentially for Jonathan Taylor with Anthony Richardson, and the exact same issue holds true for DeAndre Swift. And people were really excited when the Lions traded him to the Eagles. But I don't think this is a good thing for him, because last year Swift saw a 15% team target share, which ranked 7th among running backs. And the 2 seasons before that, Swift saw 18% and 13%, which ranked 2nd and 10th among running backs. He's never hit 700 rushing yards in a season. So the vast majority of his production has come as a receiver. And now he's going to the Eagles, where they ranked a dead last in targets to running backs last year with just 61 total. Now, part of that was a very easy strength of schedule that resulted in the Eagles running the ball a ton in the second half of games. But even projecting Philadelphia to pass more this year, I don't know that the targets to the running back position are going to increase. If anything, I think it's going to be more for Brown and Devontae Smith and Goddard, who we touched on earlier. Because at the end of the day, Jalen Hurts is a great scrambler who's not going to need to check the ball down a ton like someone like Jared Goff, who was Swift's quarterback in Detroit. And also at the same time, I think Swift's role overlaps a little bit with Kenneth Gainwell, who they like. And I think Rashad Penny is best suited for that early down work and goal line role. And not to mention Swift's injury history. So I just don't see the upside here. I see a lot of potential risk for not much reward. And if you can sell Swift for a 2024 first, I've seen some of those deals get done as recently as this month. Even if you can get, an early second plus a late second, something like that, I'm looking to sell Swift.
Yeah, and Rashad Penny, the big question with him is also always going to be his injury history. But when healthy, I mean, I don't see Swift, he's going to struggle to get any meaningful volume behind Rashad Penny, who has just been fantastic when he's been healthy. And, we both of the guys that you talked about, DeAndre Swift and Jonathan Taylor, you had a similar kind of story for both of them. And as much as we talk about how these Konami code quarterbacks are cheat codes in football, they're also death knells to running backs because they don't check down and they take away goal line work. So the same thing you were saying about Anthony Richardson, how he negatively impacts Jonathan Taylor, you're now saying about Jalen Hurts and how he negatively impacts DeAndre Swift. That is a very, very real thing. And, as a Bears fan, I talk about that all the time. We're probably not going to see a lot of fantasy relevant running backs in Chicago behind Justin Fields. So that's something that I think people are just starting to warm up to. There aren't a lot of advantages you get in fantasy football with how much information there is anymore, but that's definitely one of them, is trying to fade these running backs that are playing behind a Konami code quarterback. Michael, before I talk about my last guy, anything you'd like to tell us about this Philadelphia Eagles backfield? Because I think, Mung, you hit it on the head. There's just so much ambiguity there, and for some reason, everybody just expects Swift to be the guy, but there are a lot of talented backs in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and I loved Kenny Gainwell. I thought Gainwell played fantastic in the playoffs last year. I was buying him up everywhere before this happened. But I think it's good for DeAndre Swift to get out of Detroit, to get a new opportunity. But also, ultimately in Dynasty, I'm trying to add a little bit and get up to Tony Pollard, or I'm trying to move off. I mean, he's going in a similar range as Dallas Goedert, Jameson Williams. I mean, those are guys that I think have higher upside when you talk about Dynasty, as opposed to a running back who's been through it all. So I think I'm ultimately just investing in Rashad Penny a lot cheaper. I'm from the Philly area, and I basically want to take the cheapest option, just like we talked about before.
Yeah, and DeAndre Swift is one of those guys that was a fantastic prospect when he came into the league, and then the production wasn't really there, and then anybody that was still holding on to DeAndre Swift got so lucky when he was traded to the Eagles, opened up a sell window, and that window's probably still open if you're trying to get rid of him. Now, the final guy I will talk about is a young and sexy name that I think a lot of people are excited about right now, George Pickens. He is big, he's aggressive, he's physical, makes eye-popping catches, and because of that, people are just pushing him way too high up draft boards. Right now, when you look at his target share, it was 58th in the NFL, 15.6%. That's just terrible for what you want to see long-term from a wide receiver. His target rate, targets per route run, ranked 87th among wide receivers last year. 56th in yards per route run. It's a lot of numbers I'm throwing your way, but look at it this way. He was 16th in routes run last year, 35th in yards, and 48th in targets. So he had a massive opportunity his rookie season, and just frankly didn't do too much with it. I actually pulled comps on his number of route runs, his yardage, and his targets. The most accurate comp to rookie year George Pickens was a 32-year-old Adam Thielen. So that's what you're investing in right now when you're trying to get George Pickens, is you're basically investing in an over-the-hill Adam Thielen. I get it. He had a huge opportunity as a rookie. He made some really fun Odell Beckham type of catches, but he really just didn't do that much as far as his production. Jordan McNamara over at Football Guys, he talks about open targets per route run, and Pickens ranked in the bottom 5th percentile last year. Out of his 85 targets that he saw last year, he was covered on over 1/3 of them. So he just struggles to get open. He made a name for himself off of contested catches, but at the end of the day, this just isn't the type of profile you want to invest in long term. And he's getting pushed up near guys like Treylon Burks and Jahan Dotson, who showed us much better potential their rookie season. I just cannot get behind George Pickens right now. If you can sell him for a late first, go for it. If you can sell him for a high second right now, I'd even be contemplating that. How do you guys feel about George Pickens? Am I kind of out of line here by talking so poorly about this guy?
No, you're right on. He's one of my biggest wide receiver sells. And what I'm doing, we keep talking about these situations. I'm taking Diontae Johnson plus. I mean, he's the staple of consistency there. 87 receptions, 144 targets. But you look at wide receiver 6 and 7 over the last 2 years in targets, and then he breaks the record, 147 targets with 0 touchdowns. I mean, trust the volume. You know, a lot of people are like, what did he do with the volume? Kenny Pickett, I think, is starting to move up. You know, he's starting to ascend a little bit. I'm not totally in on him, but I think Diontae Johnson, if we take positive regression and we get him into that, 6 touchdowns like he averages over his career, he's a mid-level wide receiver too. And I think he gets separation where Pickens is that sexy guy, right? Because he's the guy making all those highlight catches that everybody likes to see. Diontae Johnson's the boring guy. I'm taking Diontae Johnson plus.
Yeah, and we'll just go off on a quick Diontae Johnson tangent here. He's another guy who is a very likely trade candidate this year. We see these Steelers do this. For whatever reason, they don't like to keep their wide receivers long term. They bring them in young, they develop them, they get them to their max potential, and then they trade them off at like 26, 27, 28 years old. So Diontae Johnson is still relatively young. He's on his second deal, but he's on a very inexpensive, team-friendly deal. So if they're at that midway point of the season and they're below 500 and it seems like they might not be making the playoffs, don't be surprised if Diontae Johnson gets moved to a better team that's contending. And he, like some of the guys that we've talked about earlier, has displayed those underlying metrics that show that in a better offense, he could be an absolute stud in fantasy. So yeah, in the same way that George Pickens is one of my biggest sells, Diontae Johnson is one of my biggest buys. Mung, I saw you kind of nodding along a little bit. Do you agree with what we're saying about George Pickens here, or do you think that there's some hope that he can improve going into year 2?
Yeah, we actually touched on Pickens on the Smash Accept podcast a few weeks back, where, when you look at player archetypes, right, when you try to compare different players with each other with what they do well, what kind of target share they're projected for, not every player is gonna fit an exact archetype, but I said on the show a few weeks ago, is there a huge difference between George Pickens and someone like Donovan Peoples-Jones, where they're good downfield targets, right? They can make those amazing contested catches. They have that big play touchdown upside. Or if you want to go the opposite end of the spectrum, somebody else who's getting a lot of hype, Christian Watson, where his separation metrics weren't great last year. His yards per route run were excellent, but we know that quarterback play affects yards per route run. Does that regress a little bit with Jordan Love? So when you're looking at these ranges of players, can I move up a little bit to get Christian Watson? Can I move down and get a first plus for Pickens and get Donovan Peoples-Jones thrown in, right? And so I think at the end of the day, Pickens isn't a bad player by any means, but people are projecting him to take a huge step forward. And while certainly players can develop, especially young players who showed promise as rookies, we can't necessarily count on that either.
Now, in this show, from an entertainment value, it's fun when people disagree. We get back and forth and people get chippy and start really making a case for themselves. We didn't get a lot of that today. I mean, today was a lot of agreement, but I think what that tells you is if all three of us are in agreement on these are the guys you should buy and these are the guys you should sell, I think we got some pretty bulletproof analysis here that you should really take to heart. I'll be the first to admit it. When we talk Dynasty on this show on the Launchpad, we keep it pretty surface level. I don't want to go too deep, but if you're a hardcore Dynasty player and you're looking to get deep into game theory and things like that, you definitely want to check out the Smash Accept pod. Guys, it's been a blast today. Always a good time getting to talk some football with you guys. Just a couple of months away from the season here. Hopefully it can come soon because it has been a long and arduous offseason. But you can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. That's Kluge. Be sure to subscribe at footballguys.com where you can get so much valuable information. We actually have a new rankings platform that you got to check out that is completely customizable to your league settings. So you pick the league size, scoring settings, roster settings. We know that your leagues are very customizable these days. So we wanted to make a set of rankings that is going to be equally as customizable. You can find that at footballguys.com/rankings. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. Over on the right side of your screen, you're going to see some other videos that we have coming out here at Football Guys. You'll also see a button where you could subscribe to check out all the content we have coming your way at youtube.com/footballguys. Thank you so much for tuning in.